Section 14 of The Pauper, the Thief and the Convict by Thomas Archer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Peter Yearsley. Chapter 12. Pentonville Prison. Pentonville, or as it was formerly called, the Model Prison, was built in 1842 at a cost of £85,000 for the reception of convicts selected to undergo probationary imprisonment previous to their transportation to the colonies. It may not be out of place to mention here that this prison was originally intended only as a sort of preparation for penal servitude abroad, and that the ticket of leave system introduced amongst this class of convicts was applied only to those who were sentenced to Van Diemen's Land. "I propose," said Sir James Graham in his letter to the Commissioners, "that no prisoner shall be admitted into Pentonville without the knowledge that it is the portal to the penal colony, and without the certainty that he bids adieu to his connections in England, and that he must henceforth look forward to a life of labour in another hemisphere. He should be made to feel that from that day, the day of his entrance into the prison, he enters on a new career. He should be told that his imprisonment is a period of probation, that it will not be prolonged above 18 months, that an opportunity of learning those arts which will enable him to earn his bread will be afforded under the best instructors, that moral and religious knowledge will be imparted to him as a guide to his future life, that at the end of 18 months, when a just estimate can be formed of the effect produced by the discipline on his character, he will be sent to Van Diemen's Land, there, if he behaves well, at once to receive a ticket of leave which is equivalent to freedom, with the certainty of abundant maintenance, the fruit of industry. If, however, he behave indifferently, he will, on being transported to Van Diemen's Land, receive a probationary pass, which will secure to him only a limited portion of his earnings, and impose certain galling restrictions on his personal liberty. If, on the other hand, he behave ill, and the discipline of the prison be ineffectual, he will be transported to Tasman's Peninsula, there to work in a probationary gang without wages and deprived of liberty, an abject convict. Pentonville Prison, then, was originally devised as a sort of penal training establishment for convicts sentenced to transportation, and it still retains so much of this character as devotes it to the reception of prisoners who undergo the longer terms of servitude which consign them to the various government stations in this country. Having previously learned thus much of its history and intention, I prepare to pay it a personal visit, still keeping in view the cases of the two patients to whose cure such careful attention is bestowed. I am not long in discovering that the place itself differs exceedingly from that gloomy pile at Millbank. It is true that it stands in an unfinished-looking, bleak, and somewhat melancholy neighbourhood. There may be some influence in all prisons which will affect their surroundings in this way, but the building itself seems to have little in common with the prevailing expression. Arriving in the early morning at the Caledonian Road station of the North London Railway, I have noticed the presence of blue-frocked, hoarse, and somewhat greasy fellow passengers, and have heard a sound of lowing and bleating so pastoral in its character that it is unaccountable, except by remembering that the cattle market lies at only a short distance. For the rest, the whole locality bears the neglected and slovenly appearance of a neighbourhood habitually awakened at preternaturally early hours. The taverns especially seem to resent this condition of existence by an unbraced and slipshod demeanour, and a look of sordid dissipation, which the unthinking are too apt to associate with night houses. Nothing, on the contrary, can, as a rule, be more metaphorically spiritless than the air of an early rising public house. But it is neither with the taverns nor their neighbourhood that I have to do, for here is the square, massive entrance to the prison, closed in front, but reached by a gate in the side, to which a broad paved causeway leads from an iron wicket at the end of the curtain wall. When once the warder's lodge is passed, and the visitor traverses the neat gravel yard, and ascends the flight of white steps leading to the half-glazed door, the imagination wanders between a hospital and a government office. Everything is so quiet and so clean. After entering the governor's waiting-room, and recording his name and the authority by which he receives permission to inspect the building, in a book kept for the purpose, he is consigned by the governor to the care of an intelligent officer, and commences his tour of the prison. Even on a dull, heavy day, those 4 long and lofty corridors are singularly light and pleasant, lighter, indeed, than that occupied by the offices, from which they spread like the sails of a windmill or 4 sticks of a fan. Here there are no close and stifling passages of solid brickwork, no dark and devious staircases leading to blind entries and double-locked barricades, no faint and sickly smell of long imprisoned air. The smooth, clean floors of asphalt in the lofty arcades are almost an agreeable promenade, while the 2 stories of light and graceful iron galleries, which occupy each corridor, are reached by slender iron stairs, and there is an open view not only from end to end of the building, but from floor to ceiling. Behind each one of that long series of clean painted doors opening onto the ground floor and the galleries above, a man is working out his sentence for a crime. It is a strange, sad show which is revealed when that circular iron concealing the peephole is turned, and I look through into some of the cells. Some criminals, intent upon their work, keep steadily sewing, hammering, or mat-making, unconscious that they are observed. Others affect to be ignorant of this fact, but betray themselves by a suddenly increased assiduity, while some glance quickly and with a painfully furtive expression at the peephole, and fall to work again with the knowledge that a human eye, but are ignorant what eye, is noting them. One at least is mistaken, and shifts his glance uneasily to the square flap through which he receives his dole of food, in the vague impression that it is dinner time. Still, it is not easy for the visitor who has recently left Millbank to associate this place with suffering, or at all events with physical suffering. The general effect is too airy and pleasant to suggest even deep depression. This is not, however, the result of the spotless cleanliness which is everywhere so apparent, for although this is a pleasant accompaniment to the main building, there is something peculiarly blank and hopeless about the smooth and bare surface of the cell walls, something terribly unsympathetic in the rigid monotony of unbroken order which is stamped upon each small detail of the prison furniture. In every cell the prisoner is working at one or other of the trades which are taught both here and at Millbank. In the case of his having undergone a period of confinement at the latter prison, he frequently comes to Pentonville a workman more or less skilled in some handicraft. Weaving cloth and calico for the convict establishments, as well as the navy, shoemaking, mat and rug weaving, and tailoring are the principal occupations, and in every cell the gas is arranged at a height to suit the class of work carried on by the prisoner. In mat making, where it is necessary to force together the fibrous cords of which the body of the mat is composed, the prisoner works with a wooden mallet, sharply shod with iron, and I learn, as I expected to learn, that this has sometimes been used against the warders as a very dangerous weapon. The weavers have, of course, less room to move about in than the others, since their looms occupy a larger space, but each cell is light and of a convenient size. The furniture consists of a copper wash basin and a closet pan, both well supplied with water from a tap which is connected with a cistern above the cell, a table flap against the wall, a stool, and the hammock and bedding, neatly rolled up during the day, and at night slung to the 2 staples which, like everything else in the cell, are spotlessly bright and clean. 2 or 3 triangular shelves of deal serve to hold the spoon, platter, tin knife, salt cellar, and so on, and on the table may frequently be seen, beside the Bible, such books as are lent to the prisoners from the library. Entering a cell in the absence of the usual inmate, who is learning to weave and is now out for exercise, I see upon the table, beside a copybook closely written in shorthand, the divine authority of the Scriptures, Milner's History of England, Sismondi's Italian Republic, and selections from the poets. It is unnecessary to say that this cell is occupied by a man whose education is above the average, and that even with these alleviations his punishment may be equal to, if not greater than, that of the merely ignorant ruffian. At Pentonville, as at Millbank, the prisoner is known only by his number. All names are at an end, but in each cell hangs a card inscribed with the previous occupation, date of conviction, and term of sentence of the occupant. Here, as at Newgate, a small handle or button in the wall of the cell communicates with a gong in the corridor, and at the moment that this is struck, a metal plate bearing the number of the cell starts out at right angles from the wall outside the door, so that the warder may at once see to what spot he has been summoned. At 6 o'clock in the morning the cells are unlocked, and each prisoner is provided with a tub and the means of sweeping and scrubbing his cell. This effected, the corridors, galleries, and entrances are cleaned by separate detachments, each of which is appointed to a particular duty under the inspection of the officers, who watch them either in the corridors or from the light iron bridges which connect the galleries. The various detachments are called, and this part of their work effected, with almost military precision, and after the cleansing of the prison is completed, the men are provided with their tools and materials by the trade instructors, and work in their cells till 7, when the bell rings for breakfast, which consists of 3/4 of a pint of cocoa, made with 3/4 of an ounce of the pure flake and 2 ounces of milk, and sweetened with 6 drachms of molasses. From 8 to 9 o'clock is the hour for chapel, and afterwards the prisoners who are not either in the infirmary or undergoing punishment receive instruction in their cells, or go out for exercise in the yards, resuming their work when they have occupied the hour given to each, and all returning to their cells at 12 o'clock. For the last half hour, it being now upon the stroke of 12, I have been watching that long line of men, clad in the coarse greyish-brown prison dress, walking rapidly in single file along the narrow strips of pavement which are laid down in concentric rings in the exercising yards. There is no lagging, for they are made to move forward at a brisk pace, and although communications occasionally pass between them, even at the distance at which they are separated, it must be difficult for the uninitiated to bestow many confidences on each other. There are 4 of these airing grounds, but the men who are under punishment exercise in separate yards, several long-walled and whitewashed alleys radiating from a central building, like a substantial dome-covered summer-house, to the different divisions of the building from which the prisoners are brought. The walls of the summer-house just mentioned seem to consist of strong doors, each of which is the end of one of the yards, and can overlook it by means of a wire-guarded aperture. It is not there that I am standing, however, but at the very summit of the prison, to which the governor of the establishment has led me by so many spiral staircases that I am not a little giddy. From this height I can look down upon the external arrangements of the building, which reminds me of a gigantic toy just put together out of a great chip-deal box. A mechanical toy, however, for I can obtain a bird's-eye view of the grounds, of the divisions of the yards, of the long brown stream of prisoners moving in circles round the brick paths, the outer walls, where the warders' houses stand like postern towers, and that division where some privileged prisoners, whose good conduct entitles them to the small amount of association labour accorded at Pentonville, are busy with spade and barrow. But 12 strikes, and all the men are once more busy in their cells. There is time before dinner to see the storerooms, where great piles of cloth for convict garments, a stock of liberty clothes for discharged prisoners according to their previous position, and a wonderful assortment of calico, canvas, tweed, and boots and shoes of all makes and sizes occupy the shelves of a series of apartments below the basement, almost exactly resembling the warehouse of some large city firm. The most attractive manufacture of Pentonville seems to be ornamental mats and rugs, including hearthrugs. Of these there are an almost endless variety of very superior quality, and many of them of bright colours and handsome patterns. To attend to the storerooms is another privilege of certain prisoners, and the bright look which comes into the faces of the men as the governor orders them to display some of the goods they have in charge speaks volumes in favour of such a relaxation of prison rigour in some cases. The other associations are those of the bakers and the cooks, so as dinner time is approaching, and I am promised a convict repast, I hasten to see how the principal meal of the day will be dispensed, learning on my way that the water for the use of the prison is obtained from an artesian well, and that woe may be confidently expected to betide the contractor who should supply an adulterated article for prison diet. On the journey to the kitchen, it is worth while to turn aside to discover the meaning of the aromatic smell which pervades a portion of the offices abutting on one of the yards. It is here that the cocoa nibs are roasted, ground, and flaked, so that there can be no possibility of any spurious admixture. Scarcely less pleasant is the odour from the batch of bread which is just being drawn from the ovens in the bakery. Of the 560 prisoners in Pentonville prison, it may be doubted whether one ever ate bread so pure as that of which he now receives 20 ounces a day. The quality is that known among bakers as the best seconds, but of flour which undergoes a very rigid examination, and with no adulteration in the process of manufacture. The loaves, which lie in long rows, are small and of the shape known as brick. Having seen and written something of the bakeries of the metropolis and the bread made in them, I make some slight examination of one of the loaves, and am led to believe that the prison bread of Pentonville is equal, if not superior to, that which is ordinarily consumed by middle-class families. There is a slight bustle in the kitchen just now, for the 560 dinners will have to be served in some 10 or 12 minutes, and the great coppers of soup are bubbling, and the potatoes are steaming over the hot pipes by which all the cooking is effected, while one of the chefs is already busy cutting and weighing the allowance of meat. Here too the assistant cooks are mostly military prisoners, and do their work admirably. The dinner at Pentonville is a good, nourishing, substantial meal, and the soup, which is now steaming from the open coppers, and making the rather dark underground kitchen still more foggy, is as strong and rich of meat as that usually sold at the best eating-houses in London. Crede experto. The potatoes are of the mealiest, and the soup the meatiest, that I have tasted for some time past, charity dinners included. The dietary orders include beef and mutton on alternate days, and the liquor of yesterday's boiling is made into today's soup by the addition of shins or other coarse parts of beef, carrots, onions, and a little seasoning. The ordinary rations for dinner are 4 ounces of cooked meat without bone, half a pint of the soup just mentioned, a pound of potatoes, and 5 ounces of bread. But here, as at Millbank, a slightly reduced scale of living is about to be tried as an experiment. Men for whom extra diet is ordered have 2 pounds of potatoes, while, of course, the men in the infirmary receive whatever is ordered, even wine or spirits if necessary. Several large wooden trays have already been brought forward and filled with round tin cans, each of which contains a partition to divide the meat and potatoes from the soup. When these are filled, a wooden flap opens in the floor of the corridor above the kitchen, and they are raised by means of a lifting apparatus, the iron rods of which reach from the bottom to the top of the building. Those rations destined for the lower cells are wheeled along the corridors in trucks, while for the upper series the iron tops of the parallel galleries make a tramway, and the trucks are pushed along the corridor with wonderful ease and dispatch. 2 officers attend each truck. One of them opens the square flap in the door of each cell, upon which, as it falls inward and makes a sort of shelf or table, the other deposits the ration, so that the whole of the prisoners are served in an incredibly short space of time. The afternoon passes principally in the ordinary work of the prison until 5:30, which is the prisoners' supper time. This meal consists of a pint of gruel, made with 1.5 ounces of meal and sweetened with 6 drachms of molasses, together with 5 ounces of bread. The personal cleanliness of the prison is strictly enforced, and a series of baths, enclosed by separate boxes where there is room to dress and undress, occupy a portion of the building. It is no part of my intention to express any very decided opinion on the relative merits or demerits of our convict system. I visit these prisons to describe, not to discuss, but I may say without prejudice that the health and physical comfort of the British felon is better cared for than that of the ordinary British pauper, and receives far more earnest attention than that of the British soldier or the British sailor. The principal distinctions made at Pentonville are between the prisoners who are known to be desperate and dangerous, the unruly criminals sent back from the public works to undergo a second probation, those who are working out their first 9 months' preparation, and the men who have conducted themselves so well as to be entitled to a badge and to the advantage of association work. But here, as in Millbank, the conclusions arrived at by the Commission of Inquiry into Prison Discipline are unfavourable to association during this stage, and complete separate confinement will now be substituted for it. Although corporal punishment is sometimes resorted to, the usual discipline for the worst part of the prisoners is the dark cell and the punishment diet, which consists of only a pound of bread a day and water to drink. This is said to be more effectual than any other method, although many of the old offenders care very little for the horrors of the Black Room, and sleep away the greater part of their time there. These cells are similar to those at Millbank, and are placed under the same regulations. One of the most common offences is talking in chapel, or otherwise endeavouring to establish communications with another prisoner. It would be idle to suppose that these attempts are always detected. The utmost vigilance is inadequate to prevent it, and it is the consciousness of this difficulty which has induced the directors of prisons to abolish the association of the criminals altogether. The chapel, which is a large square building, was formerly fitted with long seats, divided into entirely separate stalls, concealing the prisoners from each other, the officers occupying very elevated desks, commanding the whole area of the floor. These were found inadequate to prevent communication, however, since they in reality gave greater opportunities for the prisoners to conceal their faces, and now only ordinary forms are placed along the ground floor, the seats beside the high pulpit being reserved for the governor and deputy governor. The warders occupy raised seats similar to those of the monitors' desks at schools, which are placed along the walls, so that each officer can overlook about 6 forms, and it is believed that there is now less talking, even under cover of the prayer book and during the responses. But some of the older prisoners can speak without moving a muscle of the face, and even in the cells, various methods of communicating by speaking through the water pipes, or by the mysterious organisation of a code of signals by a given number and variety of taps upon the wall, have been from time to time discovered. The prisoners are drafted from the chapel by means of a sort of signal plate which stands in the lobby at the entrance, and is worked in a similar way to the contrivances used in offices for showing the date of the month by shifting a card opposite a hole in the front of the box. This summons each section of the congregation to return to the cells in proper order. There is but little time to walk through the clean and airy infirmary, and to visit the violent prisoner who has been placed in the dark padded cell and subjected to a shower bath, for already fresh arrivals are here from Millbank, and our 2 ruffians among them. He of the lowering face has already received an indifferent character. He is still moody, sullen, and apparently hopeless. His companion looks round him with a mingled expression of indignation and cunning. He will work well and keep quiet, and will get a badge, and finally reduce his sentence by a ticket of leave, but perhaps neither for his own good nor that of the community. They are both standing now with the rest of the prisoners who have come from Millbank, handcuffed. The doctor, who has received a certificate of their health, inspects them presently, asking them a few questions, and is followed by the governor, who speaks to them kindly but firmly of the discipline and regulations of the prison. After a short address from the chaplain, they are marshalled into the room where they strip for examination and the bath, a regulation necessary to prevent them from concealing any article of which they may have contrived to possess themselves, and particularly letters, of which they will be allowed to receive one from their friends every 3 months, subject to good conduct, and the inspection of all letters, either sent or received, by the governor and chaplain. The 2, whose period of servitude has here reached its 2nd stage, are consigned to separate corridors. One of them, the intractable, is standing with folded arms and clenched hands in the very middle of his cell, glaring like some sullen, half-tamed brute, who will presently dash itself against the door. The other is seated on his stool, looking on the ground, but he gets up presently, and turns carelessly to a printed form which hangs against the wall, with the card already mentioned. This is a notice to convicts, explaining how he may receive a visit from his friends after a certain period of good conduct, how he may receive a diet superior to that already described, how he may, by industry and similar good conduct, become entitled to a badge which will entitle him to certain privileges, the principal of which will at first be his recommendation to the gratuities that are placed to the credit of certain prisoners, and may be increased at each stage until, when he reaches the public works, they will amount to about 10d. a week for the whole time of his subsequent servitude, and how he may, if he persevere in his good endeavours, be placed in such a position on his removal to the public works that the term for which he is sentenced may be shortened 1/4 by a ticket of leave. The new prisoner is only disturbed from his contemplation of these advantages by the arrival of his supper, and as the can of gruel is pushed in at the open trap, it may be conjectured that he is already looking beyond the probation of Pentonville, and anticipating the outdoor labour of the Isle of Portland, whither I intend to follow him. End of section 14. Section 15 of The Pauper, the Thief and the Convict by Thomas Archer. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Peter Yearsley. Chapter 13. The Convict Establishment at Portland. When I left my 2 convicts to work out the period of their second stage of servitude at Pentonville prison, I remarked that one of them at least probably looked forward with some hope to his removal to the government establishment in the island of Portland. Had he known how large a measure of liberty would be secured by attaining this third stage, his anticipations would have been even more pleasant. Or, on the other hand, I may wrong him by not having taken into consideration the likelihood that he had heard all about it from some acquaintance who had recalled the pleasant memories of this penal settlement long after obtaining that ticket of which he found it difficult to make any practical use. However this may be, it is certain that in this last and considerably longest stage, the thraldom of separate confinement and silent labour commenced at Millbank and rather refined than mitigated at Pentonville is virtually abandoned. Increased diet, healthy work in the open bracing air, and companionship, which includes conversation, during the hours of labour, must make Portland a sort of paradise, where imprisonment is abolished in favour of friendly guardianship and wholesome restraint. This would doubtless be the impression upon the mind of a convict on whom his previous discipline had produced the desired effect, and who came out into the corridor at Pentonville on the morning of his removal, chastened, reformed, and repentant. That it is really the opinion of a very large majority of the 1115 felons, most of whom are now quarrying stones for Portland breakwater, would be too much to expect. The faces of the 8 men who have just been assembled in the prison yard at Pentonville, and amongst whom the 2 whose course I have been following now meet closely for the first time since their conviction, express very little, if any, emotion beyond that involved in the endeavour to keep warm. For it is a dull, chilly morning, and their sudden transition from the temperate atmosphere of the cells has made them shiver a little in the raw air from the yard. Very little alteration is observable in their demeanour until they reach the railway station, to which they are taken in the prison van, pretty securely fastened by a light chain passing from one to another through the handcuff. Once there and seated in the carriage, they look for some opportunity to communicate with the outer world, and probably surprise some strange passenger who is standing on the platform, and who happens to regard them intently, by telegraphing with their fingers the number of years they have to serve. With this, and such few observations amongst themselves as are permitted by the officer in charge, they must be content until they reach Weymouth. But it would be difficult to estimate the effect upon men so long confined within prison limits, and especially the dull routine of the separate cells, of that ride through the pure, bracing air, with the sight of the wild open country, the sheltered homesteads, the clustering villages, the birds upon the wing, the cattle browsing on the hills. Whatever may be its influence, however, they are not very demonstrative. Many of them look on, if not listlessly, at least with an appearance of stolid indifference, like that which rests upon the face of our beetle-browed ruffian. His companion notes these things, indeed, with a quick glance and a slight smile, not without a shade of sarcasm. Once or twice he indicates some object in the landscape, but finally relapses into that dogged, half-patient look which seems habitual even to the best of the convicts, and under which who shall tell what are their real thoughts? With very little alteration in this demeanour, but with quick, suspiciously inquiring glances, they make the journey from Weymouth to Portland. Only now and then one of their number fixes his eye steadfastly on the ships far out at sea. Its great expanse must bring upon him a strange sense of freedom. Then, as they begin to climb the rugged road which leads to the summit of this Hearthstone Island, as they pass Fortune's Well, and at length emerge amidst the broken stony ground, the treeless waste, the rough zigzag stone walls, the bare yellowish-white cottages and scattered taverns, the chaos of stone, from which in this part of the island some rude settlement seems to have sprung, they have enough to occupy their attention. Past the last rude farm plot, beside the steep road cut up with iron tramways, and round by that row of high white cottages, the quarters of the married prison officers, and they have arrived at their destination. And this is my destination also, for which I have sternly resisted all the fascinations of Weymouth, its pleasant resorts and fashionable society, the dignified composure, not to say dullness, of its broad promenade, and the attractive beauty of its broad bay, with the green hills and the White Horse in the distance. Not even the guide-book, Antiquities of Portland, itself, can, for the present, change me from the purpose for which I have made the journey from London. The castle, once the residence of that bluff king and bloated criminal, who himself essayed to put down cut-purses and footpads, to which end he planted the gallows trees in such goodly numbers. The Portland Arms, where George III of glorious memory was wont to dine, and where is kept the old Danish reeve staff, that ancient tally or score on which the bailiff of the island kept account of acreage and manor dues, Rufus or Bow and Arrow Castle, the old church, the new church, even the lighthouses, fail to divert my interest from the great waste of stone quarry, wild hill rise, and furzy grass, where even the wheatear, the only bird which seems to be found upon the island, is seldom seen, and amidst which the convict settlement lies hedged in with long straggling walls. From a queer old hostelry near the pier, where there seems to be neither bar nor parlour nor friendly tap, the burning brandy being served to you from a long irregular space behind a low metal-topped counter, and with an air of secrecy as though it were dimly associated with some reminiscences of smuggling, I contrived to hire, after much doubt on the part of the landlord, who speaks a polyglot jargon of Jersey French, Welsh English, and Basque Spanish, a springless vehicle, composed apparently of two primitive gigs fastened together and set upon 4 wheels, and in this am driven by a silent boy, up the steep and boulder-broken roads, and across the rugged tramways leading to the home of the British convict. Portland Prison, which is constructed to contain 1,500 convicts, is composed of 3 long and lofty parallelograms, one of which is a double building, and a large block in form of a wing, lying somewhat in the rear of one of the main structures. All these are built of stone in the same way as the houses on the island, the single buildings containing 4 and the double buildings 5 stories of cells, and the upper ones opening from light iron corridors similar to those at Pentonville, the corridors and the whole of the main building being lighted principally from the roof. The spaces between the blocks of building, which are spanned above by an iron bridge extending from one block to another, serve as open areas in which the prisoners are paraded every day before being taken out to labour. Beyond these, in front of the prison is the garden, where the vegetables are grown for the prison consumption. The other garden, which is in fact no more than a neat grass-plotted yard in the area before the inner entrance, contains some curious remains dug up from the quarries during the progress of the works. Among them are stone sarcophagi in which skeletons were discovered, remnants of the Roman occupation of the island, an immense petrified tree trunk still exhibiting the grain and bark of the wood, an altar slab, and some large description of stone-embedded shell or marine animal, which goes in Portland by the name of conger eel, and in which the articulations, or rather corrugations, are quite distinct. Leaving these reminiscences of its former condition, however, for the more commonplace divisions of the prison, I am conducted to the storerooms, where the clothes and shoes which have been made in the London establishments are kept for the inmates at Portland. Here I recognise the heavy nailed boots, the rough clothing, and the quilts and blankets, which I have previously seen in their various stages of manufacture at Millbank and Pentonville. Among the few convicts who are engaged within the building, I notice some variety of costume, and learn that the regulation dress consists of cord trousers, a blue slop or coarse frock of blue striped with white, and a light blue striped cap. These, which are the summer garments, give place in winter to a brownish-grey jacket, similar to those worn at the London prisons, and a black oilskin hat painted with coloured stripes. Those men whose term has nearly expired, from its having been shortened in consequence of good conduct, are dressed in a blue suit, with PP stamped upon it in red letters, an odd arrangement, which gives them the appearance of having been wrongly delivered at various stations by some parcels conveyance company. The party which has just arrested my attention are bringing in bread, under the direction of a couple of officers, and I follow them to the bakery, necessarily a large building, since it has to provide for such an army of eaters. At Portland, none of these offices are under the basement, so that the bakery is in reality a lofty and well-lighted adjunct to the main building, opening onto one of the yards, its row of ovens, and the bins and troughs scrupulously clean, and the whole place well ventilated. Every day a separate loaf of the required weight for each meal is furnished to the prisoner, the bread being of the same quality as that used at the London establishments. The kitchen is a similar building to the bakery, and contrasts favourably with those of the London prisons on account of its lightness. The arrangements are precisely similar, except that at Portland only beef is provided, but the method of cooking is the same, and the great coppers of soup, the joints of meat, and the huge steamers which hold the potatoes, give forth a savoury smell to appetites sharpened by that clean sea air. Although no trades are taught or carried on at Portland, There are workshops where such of the men as are selected for the purpose, from having previously had some experience in these callings, either in or out of prison, carry on the necessary repairs connected with the establishment. For this purpose, 1 or 2 large rooms are appropriated to the tailors and shoemakers, who mend the boots and clothes which have been worn by former inmates, and the carpenters' and blacksmiths' shops are busy with the sound of saw and hammer in order to keep up the repairs connected with the building, or to replace the furniture of the various departments. In these shops the men work under the direction of instructors, but the silent system is not a part of the discipline at Portland, so that the business of the day goes on under very few depressing influences. Perhaps the most interesting of the workshops is the forge, where the machinery is repaired, and the men work at bellows and anvil upon the iron fittings of the cranes and stone carriages. I wish I could say that the work is willingly and cheerfully performed, but I am bound to state that in many instances the weight of the hammer slowly performs the labour. There is very little weight of arm or energy of muscle displayed beyond that which is actually required to lift the tools. The cells are comfortable little cabins enough, not, of course, as large as those of the London prisons, since no labour has to be performed in them. They are sleeping apartments, of about 4 feet wide, 7 in length, and 7 feet high, each furnished with a window, and the walls formed of corrugated iron. They contain a slung hammock, with mattress, blankets, sheets, and quilts, a stool and wash basin, and a nest of deal shelves, in which the prisoner keeps his plate, mug, and pannikin of tinware, such books as he is allowed to borrow from the library, and other small articles of daily use. On their arrival at Portland, the prisoners receive a considerably augmented provision of food, since it is understood that their constant labour in the open air requires that the quantity should be increased. The ordinary meals consist of breakfast, for which they receive a pint of cocoa with milk and sugar and 28 ounces of bread for the day. The dinner allowance of each man is Sunday 5 ounces of cheese, Monday 5 ounces of mutton for dinner, and its own liquor flavoured with onions and thickened with any bread left from the previous day. Tuesday 1 pint of soup made from 9 ounces of shin of beef, 4 ounces of fresh vegetables, 2 ounces of pearl barley, soup flavoured and thickened as on Mondays. Wednesday, same diet as on Monday. Thursday, 1 pound of suet pudding. Friday, 5 ounces of beef with a pint of beef liquor, flavoured and thickened as on Tuesday. Saturday, same diet as on Friday. During the week, 1 pint of cocoa for breakfast and 1 pint of gruel for supper. Each allowance of meat is weighed after being cooked, and must be free from bone. 1 pound of good potatoes is served to each man daily at dinner, except on Sundays, when the convicts do no hard work. To these rations, the good conduct men, whose period has nearly expired, have certain very welcome additions. They may obtain tea in place of the evening gruel, and sometimes dine off baked beef with the addition of suet pudding. On Sundays, too, they are often allowed half a pint of beer with their slice of cheese. This, which is the diet according to the new regulations, and is diminished from that which was allowed until July of the present year, would, I cannot but imagine, be a luxurious scale of living to many an honest labourer, one, indeed, beyond his utmost dreams. And yet, when this dietary table was first acted upon, there were indications both at Dartmoor and at this settlement at Portland which caused the authorities to fear a dangerous riot. The pampered ruffians absolutely refused to work, and were very properly placed in irons, but the military were called in and threatened to fire on the ringleaders unless they submitted. While I am gathering this information under the intelligent guidance of one of the principal warders, our convicts have been admitted to the prison, where the roll has been called over by an officer, after which they have been submitted to the baths, similar to those with which they were recently familiar, have been freshly cropped and shaved, have been examined by the medical officer, and have assumed the uniform of Portland in exchange for their former dress. After having been drafted to their cells and furnished with the regulation meal, they are conducted to the chapel, where they will be spoken to by the chaplain, and have a half day in every week appointed, on which they will be expected to attend school. The chapel, which is also used as the schoolroom, is a spacious building containing a pulpit and reading desk, and a deep gallery for the wives and families of the officers. The prisoners, who all assemble here twice a day for prayers, occupy forms on the floor, while the officers sit on seats elevated against the wall, where they can overlook their various divisions. School is going on as I enter the building, and 3 or 4 teachers are giving instruction by means of books, slates, and blackboards. One of the prisoners, a keen, quick-eyed fellow, is engaged apart at a table in rebinding some of the books belonging to the prison library, and I observe that he is not only neat and skilful in his manipulation, but is at work with the rapidity and apparent earnestness which is one of the most surprising things I have witnessed during my visit. I cannot but remark, too, that the faces of the majority of the scholars are less dull and dogged than those of the London prisoners, that they have brightened not only with the evidence of health, but with those of renewed interest. In this light, lofty chapel, and with a tolerably attractive lesson, there must be something very holiday-like in their afternoon's occupation. A bell, which rings presently, is the signal for the return of the convicts from work, and as our 2 criminals once more retire to their cells, the various companies come in for the night, and assemble for evening prayers. It should be remembered that the present system of penal servitude was originally intended only to prepare convicts for working out the remainder of the term in another country, and that the ticket of leave was not at first designed for any but transported felons, who might look forward hopefully to a more virtuous career under entirely new conditions. This fact was warmly insisted on by the late Sir Joshua Jebb during a conversation with the writer, and indeed it will serve to explain the apparent failure which seems so often to attend the sequel of our present scheme of secondary punishments. Apart from this consideration, however, the visitor to the 2 metropolitan prisons of which I have already given some description will be impressed with the anxious care with which not only the health but the complete physical comfort of the criminal is preserved. At Pentonville this is more observable even than at Millbank, but the idea acquires strength as it advances, and at Portland the full development of the system renders it impossible to avoid comparing the lot of the convicted felon, not alone with that of the more unfortunate amongst the paupers, but with that of the soldier or sailor under duty, or of the poor honest labourer whose daily bread is dependent upon his continued exertion. It is true that this comparison does not necessarily involve the conclusion that criminals should either receive less tender nurture or more positive punishment, but in a district like Portland, where the contrast is so easily made between convicted felons, well clothed, well lodged, fully fed, comfortably provided, and by no means overworked, and a number of labourers in the same locality, to whom the prison fare would be something very much like high living, the impression naturally takes the form of an argument, and the anomaly is too easily confounded with practical injustice. The various companies, they are too susceptible of a convict's feelings to call them gangs at Portland, and on my using this term I am at once put to confusion by the deprecatory correction of my guide, are now coming in from the quarry, and enter the gates as they arrive in their divisions, under the charge of the armed officers in blue uniforms, who superintend their work. They are, for the most part, healthy and fleshy-looking fellows, and with all the variety of countenance which an assembly of mixed prisoners would necessarily present. As I stand looking at them, and still with the comparison of which I have just spoken in my mind, I think of the anecdote of that worthy gentleman who, in reply to the demand of his butler for an increased salary, said, "Do you know that your income already exceeds that of many clergymen in the established church?" "I have always been exceedingly sorry for those gentlemen," replied the butler with dignity, "but that is no reason why I should forego my own reasonable advantages." What are the reflections of the two inmates whose progress I have been following, it would be difficult to determine. On their way to the prison, they have caught a glimpse of some of those sentries armed with sword and carbine who form a cordon round the works, and the sight may not have been reassuring. On the entrance of the labourers, and after a glance at their faces, however, the more hopeful ruffian brightens up a little, and each of them is presently conducted to his cell, there to prepare for the new field of exertion which will open to him tomorrow. They, in common with the rest, are awakened by the ringing of the bell at 5 o'clock in the morning, and are expected to sweep their cells and to perform their toilet in time for breakfast, the serving of which commences at 5:45 o'clock, by means of wooden trays, resembling the gratings used to stand upon at baths, on which the rations are carried from the kitchen to the cells. At 6:30 o'clock all the prisoners assemble in the chapel for morning prayers, which occupy only a few minutes, and at 6:45 they are paraded in their various divisions in the open areas which divide the blocks of building forming the prison. In advance of these, and extending almost along the entire front of the prison, is a raised embankment, its smooth sides covered with mown grass, and with an even walk upon the top, and here the officers stand to inspect the divisions as they are arranged to proceed to the quarries. Confusion is prevented by the number of each detachment being distinctly painted upon a sort of large garden labels, one of which is stuck in the slope of the embankment opposite the spot which each company is to occupy on parade. Here they undergo a rapid superficial search at the hands of the officers, and by 7 o'clock the various companies have mostly passed beyond the precincts of the building, and have reached their various stations. The scene of their labour is sufficiently striking on a first visit, not from any great appearance of activity which it presents, but on account of the wild and rugged aspect of the country. The portion of the island on which the penal settlement is stationed is, by its position, entirely cut off even from the sight of the town or villages occupying the other side, and, except a seascape in one part of it, and a view of the green slope of the fortifications in another, is entirely confined to the convicts. With this important exception, however, that closely adjoining the government quarries lie those which are being wrought by ordinary labourers. In alluding to the fortifications, it is almost necessary to mention the Portland sheep, which browse upon its grassy slopes. They are small, compact, military-looking animals, the latter qualification being due to the practice of rubbing the entire fleece with red ochre, probably for the purpose of distinguishing them amongst the yellow-white stones with which the whole island is covered. Nearly surrounded by a rough stone wall, which formerly included the whole of the works connected with the prison, lies the old St. Paul's Quarry, where some of the blocks which were rejected for the building of the Metropolitan Cathedral are still cumbering the ground. Getting out the huge blocks dispersed along the cutting, or removing the rubble from the surface where the new operations are commenced, the convicts work in detachments of from 18 to 21 men, each division being watched by a warder, whose hours of duty are longer, and his onerous charge more wearisome, than the labour of the felons. Other companies are engaged in loading the heavy stone carriages, in dragging them along the tramways, or in dressing the great blocks in an open space amidst great gaunt cranes of timber and rusty chains used for lifting and swinging the heavy masses of building stone. All round by the encircling wall, from look-out stations on the top of it, or standing on high mounds artificially raised for the purpose, the armed sentries keep constant watch, but the men are under as little control as is in any degree consistent with the fact of their being prisoners, and talk together with comparative freedom while they leisurely pursue their allotted occupation. There is certainly a great difference between their rate of working and that of the ordinary quarrymen who are engaged by the contractors at the neighbouring cuttings. There is something singularly picturesque in the appearance of the broken ground and the high white walls of solid stone, full of great fissures whence blocks have been taken. This is perhaps more apparent in the newer quarry just without the old boundary, where a huge slice seems to have been cut away from the surface, as though the island had been treated like a cheese and partly demolished with a broad scoop. The walls left half round this amphitheatre are in some places 30 or 40 feet high, and the timber bridge, which crosses a cleft in one part, is supported on buttresses left standing when all around them had been removed. Almost the whole surface is broken and rugged, and winding tramways lead to a great shed raised on timber piles and containing an enormous drum on which a chain is coiled for letting the stone wagons down a steep incline towards the breakwater, where they are received and carried away by the locomotive engines. The prison area does not, however, extend so far as this, the stone being delivered at the boundary, where it is taken in charge by the proper officials. It would perhaps be absurd to suppose that the convicts do not occasionally communicate with persons outside the prison, and, notwithstanding the vigilant supervision, there is no doubt that they sometimes contrive to obtain money from their friends, or become possessed of small quantities of tobacco. The endeavours to make use of the most trifling opportunities to obtain contraband articles being probably keen enjoyments which are pretty often experienced, especially as any small article which can be covered with the foot is scarcely likely to be detected. The topics of conversation, too, may be numerous and personally interesting, even under such apparently unfavourable circumstances. The exceptions to the system of general indulgence are the men who have attempted to escape, have assaulted an officer, or have generally misconducted themselves by refusing to work or by defying the authorities. For the first two of these offences, the culprit wears a distinguishing dress of grey and yellow or grey and black, and are chained when at work. For the latter, the punishment is separate confinement on bread and water, or, in extreme cases, the dark cell. At 11:30, the bell calls them all to dinner. A few of the men working at a distant part of the quarry have their rations brought out to them, and dine al fresco. The majority, however, reassemble in the prison, and dine in their cells, where they have a full hour to eat and rest, and, if they please, to read the books lent them from the library on school days. At 1 o'clock they return to their work, and are recalled for the night at 5:45, when, after a few minutes, during which they assemble for evening prayers, they once more enter their cells, receive their supper and a candle, for only the corridors and general buildings are lighted with gas which is made on the premises, and may again amuse themselves with their books till about 8 o'clock, when they go to bed, the night warders remaining on duty to watch the cells. Once a week, on his school day, each prisoner takes a bath and has his hair cut, and they are all expected to shave 3 times a week. At various points upon the works there are places to which the men retreat for shelter should the weather be unfavourable, and on unmistakably wet days they are not taken out to labour at all, but remain in their cells, where they are allowed to read, the doors of the cells not being closed. On Sundays also, in the intervals between their attendance at divine service, the doors of the cells are allowed to remain open, and detachments of the men walk in the prison yard. Those prisoners who have received good conduct marks are rewarded by numerous indulgences, mostly taking the form of comfortable additions to their meals, such as baked beef, treacle pudding, and, if they prefer it, the substitution of tea for cocoa or gruel. Throughout the whole arrangements, this promotion of physical comfort seems to be the pervading principle, and even in the case of the few convicts who are consigned to Western Australia, the difference of rations on board the transport ship must at first be a serious inconvenience, to say nothing of the confined space and the more restricted liberty of a crowded vessel. As I have already been reminded, many alterations are now to be made in the administration of convict prisons, and a reduction has been proposed in the future rations of those who are now under punishment. The total number of those who were received under sentence last year was 2,848. Amongst all the proposed alterations, however, there is one from which some very useful results may be anticipated. It is that the period of a convict's imprisonment shall be measured by the actual quantity of work which he performs, no remission being granted for good conduct, which must be indispensable to entitle him to any reward for his industry, a reward which he will forfeit by subsequent misbehaviour. Of our two criminals, the fiercely stolid ruffian who scarcely unbends those overhanging brows, even with all these advantages, works with some will, and uses his hammer sometimes in a way which excites the contemptuous laughter of his companion. But he is restive and defiant, brutal in his obstinacy. It is very doubtful whether his sentence will be shortened. The other allows his hammer to work by its own weight, is smugly silent and attentive, and keeps his own counsel. He will soon be high in the prison books, and have money entered to his credit. When their respective terms of servitude expire, the steward will make up their accounts, and they will be sent in charge of an officer to the place from which they were convicted, that is to say, in their case, to London and to Millbank Prison, where they will receive a dress suitable to the calling they ostensibly followed previous to their sentence, and a part of the sum which has become due to them on account of the prison gratuities. After a period of 3 months, and if they can produce testimony, such as a letter from the clergyman of the parish, or some other respectable person, that they have been living honestly, they may receive a further instalment, and so on, until it has all been paid. It is matter for regret that few convicts discharged with a ticket of leave apply for more than the second instalment of this money. This may be partially explained by the knowledge that many of them go to distant parts of the country, and that others do not wish to revive the recollections of the prison authorities or the police, but assume fresh names and fresh pursuits. But it is also too well known that a large number of them re-enter upon a course which may ultimately lead them back to the comforts of Portland Prison. It is well understood, too, that in this country, and especially in London, a discharged convict has very little chance of obtaining honest employment by which he can live comfortably, or of keeping it even when he has obtained it, after his antecedents once become known. And these are the significant facts which are most difficult to deal with in any earnest inquiry respecting the defects of our present system of penal servitude. The End. End of Section 15. End of The Pauper, the Thief and the Convict by Thomas Archer.